His name was on the door now. Dylan Martinez, regional manager. I stared at that nameplate for a full 30 seconds before I knocked, my stomach doing flips like I was about to walk into a trap. Because I was. I'd known it was coming for 6 months, ever since corporate announced his promotion. 6 months to prepare, to document, to build my case. And now here we were. He didn't look up when I walked in. Just kept typing, making me stand there like some intern waiting for approval. The power play was obvious. Pathetic, really. This was the same guy who used to cry during romantic comedies, who'd burn toast and set off the smoke alarm at 2 a.m. Now he sat behind a mahogany desk wearing a suit that cost more than my rent, pretending he was someone important. Finally, he leaned back in his chair, smiled. Not a friendly smile. A smile that said he'd won something. He said, "Close the door." I did. My phone was in my blazer pocket, recording app already running. I'd started recording every interaction with him the day he became my boss. Every meeting, every hallway conversation, every email I'd screenshot and backed up to 3 different cloud services. I wasn't stupid. I knew exactly who I was dealing with. He said, "I've been reviewing your performance metrics." My heart rate kicked up, but I kept my face neutral. I said, "Okay." He said, "You're underperforming. Missing targets. Your client retention numbers are down 15% this quarter." That was a lie. My numbers were the best on the team, and he knew it. I'd closed the Hartman account 2 weeks ago, a deal worth $200,000 that he'd tried to take credit for in the regional meeting. But I didn't argue. Not yet. I said, "I wasn't aware there were concerns." He stood up, walked around the desk, got too close. I could smell his cologne. The same one he wore when we were together. The scent made my skin crawl. He said, "There are a lot of concerns, Amanda, about your attitude, your commitment to the team, whether you really want to be here." I knew where this was going. I'd been expecting it. But hearing it out loud still felt like a punch to the gut. He said, "So here's what I'm thinking. We can fix this. We can make all these concerns disappear. But you're going to need to be more cooperative." I said, "What does that mean?" He moved closer. I could see the calculation in his eyes, the certainty that he had me cornered. He said, "Get back with me or you're fired." Just like that. No pretense, no subtlety. 5 words that would end his entire career. I forced myself to look uncertain. Bit my lip like I was considering it. Let my eyes drop to the floor. I said, "Dylan, I don't know if that's..." He cut me off. Said, "You have until next Friday to decide. Think about it carefully. Jobs are hard to come by right now, especially in this market, especially with the kind of reference you'd get if things went badly here." The threat was crystal clear. Play along or he'd destroy my career. Make sure I couldn't get hired anywhere in the industry. He had connections, influence, the power to follow through. I said, "Can I have some time to think?" He smiled again. Said, "Of course. Take a week. But Amanda, make the right choice. For both of us." I walked out of that office on shaky legs and went straight to the bathroom. Locked myself in a stall and let myself shake for 5 minutes. Then I pulled out my phone, stopped the recording, and uploaded it to my encrypted backup. Recording number 47. The crown jewel of a collection that would bury him. I met Dylan 3 years ago at a sales conference in Chicago. I was 29, newly promoted to senior account manager, riding high on a career that was finally taking off after years of grinding through entry-level positions and proving myself in a male-dominated industry. He was 32, charming, funny, with this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room. We dated for 18 months. Good months, mostly. He took me to nice restaurants, remembered my birthday, met my parents at Thanksgiving. We talked about moving in together, about where we saw things going. I thought I'd found someone solid, someone real. The breakup was my decision. I started noticing things. The way he'd get angry if I worked late, accusing me of choosing my career over him. How he'd make comments about my clothes, suggesting I dressed too professionally, that I was trying to impress other guys at the office. Little controlling behaviors that added up over time. The final straw was when he went through my phone while I was in the shower. Confronted me about a text from Marcus, my colleague, about a client presentation. It was completely professional, but Dylan turned it into this whole interrogation about whether I was cheating. I realized then that this wasn't going to get better, that I deserved better, so I ended it. He didn't take it well. Showed up at my apartment at midnight, drunk, begging me to reconsider. Called me 73 times in one weekend. I had to threaten to call the cops before he finally backed off. Then silence. 3 months of nothing. I thought maybe he'd moved on. Found someone else. I was relieved. Then corporate announced the reorganization. Our region was getting a new manager. They flew in some executive from the New York office. Dylan Martinez, my ex-boyfriend, my new boss. I remember sitting in that conference room during the announcement, watching him shake hands with everyone. That perfect smile plastered on his face. When his eyes landed on me, I saw something flicker there. Recognition. Calculation. Like he was already planning something. After the meeting, he pulled me aside, said we should keep things professional, that the past was the past. I wanted to believe him. Wanted to think he'd matured enough to handle this situation like an adult. I was wrong. The harassment started small. Comments about my outfits during team meetings. Questions about my weekend plans that felt too personal. Assigning me to work late on projects with him, alone in the office after everyone else had gone home. Each incident was subtle enough that I couldn't complain without sounding paranoid. But together, they painted a clear picture. He was testing boundaries, seeing how far he could push. That's when I started documenting everything. I bought a voice recorder pen, the kind that looks like a regular pen but captures crystal clear audio. I started keeping a detailed log in a password-protected document. Date, time, location, witnesses, exact quotes. Every inappropriate comment, every uncomfortable moment, every time he stood too close or touched my shoulder or made a remark about our past relationship. My best friend Sarah thought I was being paranoid. She said, "Maybe he's just trying to be friendly. Maybe you're reading too much into it." But I knew Dylan. I knew how his mind worked. This wasn't friendly. This was strategic. And then came the performance reviews. He gave me ratings that were barely satisfactory, despite my sales numbers being in the top 5% of the region. He documented concerns about my attitude, my teamwork, my reliability. All lies, but all on paper. Building a case for termination. I knew what he was doing. Creating a paper trail so he could fire me whenever he wanted. Or use it as leverage for something worse. I consulted with an employment lawyer named Patricia Huang. She listened to my story, looked through my documentation, and said I had the beginning of a hostile work environment case, but she advised me to keep collecting evidence. One incident could be explained away. A pattern was undeniable. So I kept recording, kept documenting, kept playing along just enough to not raise suspicions. And then he called me into his office and made his ultimatum. Get back with me or you're fired. He'd finally crossed the line I'd been waiting for him to cross, the line that would end him. I left work early that day. Told Dylan I was feeling sick, needed to go home. He smiled and said, "Take care of yourself," like he was a concerned boss instead of a predator who'd just threatened my livelihood. I drove straight to Patricia's office downtown. She practiced out of a sleek high-rise in the financial district, one of those buildings with glass elevators and marble floors that made you feel like serious business happened here. Her firm specialized in employment law, discrimination cases, sexual harassment. She'd handled dozens of cases like mine. She knew how to fight and win. Her assistant showed me into a conference room with a view of the city skyline. I sat down and waited, my hands trembling slightly as I pulled out my phone. The recording was there, saved and backed up, ready to play. Patricia walked in 5 minutes later. She was in her mid-40s, Korean-American, with sharp eyes and an expression that said she didn't tolerate any nonsense. She'd built her reputation on taking down powerful men who thought they were untouchable. I'd found her through an online forum for women in sales, where 3 different people recommended her with the same phrase, "She's a shark." She said, "You sounded urgent on the phone. What happened?" I said, "He made a direct threat. Told me to get back together with him, or he'd fire me." Her eyebrows went up. She said, "He said that explicitly." I said, "Word for word." And I recorded it. I played the recording for her. watched her face as Dylan's voice filled the conference room, making his ultimatum, making his threats. When it finished, she sat back in her chair and smiled. Not a friendly smile, a predator's smile. She said, "Amanda, this man just handed you his entire career on a silver platter." She explained what we had. Quid pro quo sexual harassment, abuse of power, retaliation. With 47 recordings documenting a 6-month pattern of escalating harassment, we had enough to bury him and potentially take down the entire regional office if HR had known and done nothing. She said, "Here's what's going to happen. We're going to prepare a comprehensive complaint. Every incident documented with dates, times, witnesses, audio evidence. We're going to submit it directly to corporate counsel, bypassing the regional HR office entirely, because there's a chance they're compromised, and we're going to demand an immediate investigation." I said, "What about my job? Can he fire me before we submit?" She said, "If he fires you now, after making that threat, it's retaliation, which makes the case even stronger. But we're not going to give him the chance. We're submitting the complaint Monday morning. By Monday afternoon, he'll be suspended pending investigation." I felt something unclench in my chest. For 6 months I'd been walking on eggshells, documenting abuse, pretending everything was fine while my stomach was constantly twisted in knots. Now I had someone in my corner who knew how to fight. Patricia said, "I need you to do something this weekend. Write down everything. Every incident you can remember, even the ones you didn't record. How each one made you feel. How it affected your work. The toll it took on your mental health. I need the full picture." I said, "How much is this going to cost me? I have some savings, but not a lot." She said, "I'm taking this on contingency. You don't pay unless we win. And Amanda, we're going to win. We're going to win big." I spent that weekend writing. 50 pages of incidents, feelings, impacts. I remembered the time he cornered me in the copy room and said he missed the way I tasted. The time he scheduled a client dinner and told me to wear something sexy, that it would help close the deal. The time he reassigned my biggest account to a male colleague and said I seemed too stressed lately. I should focus on smaller clients. Each memory made me angrier. Not just at Dylan, but at myself for putting up with it for so long. For thinking I needed to handle it alone. For worrying that complaining would make me look weak or difficult. By Sunday night, I had a document that laid bare 6 months of systemic harassment and abuse of power. Patricia read it Monday morning and said it was perfect. Detailed, emotional but not hysterical, exactly what we needed. She formatted everything into an official complaint. Attached all 47 audio files with transcripts. Added my performance reviews showing my actual numbers versus Dylan's false assessments. Created a timeline showing the progression from subtle harassment to explicit threats. At 9 a.m. Monday, she submitted it directly to the company's corporate counsel in New York, with a cover letter explaining that if this wasn't handled immediately and appropriately, we'd be filing with the EEOC and pursuing a public lawsuit. By 10 a.m., I got an email from corporate HR requesting a meeting that afternoon. By noon, Dylan was suspended pending investigation. By 2 p.m., I was sitting in a conference room with 3 corporate executives, 2 HR representatives, and Patricia, walking them through every single incident while they took notes and looked increasingly uncomfortable. The lead attorney, a woman named Jennifer Carlson, asked pointed questions. Had regional HR known about any of this? Had anyone else witnessed the harassment? Were there other employees who might have experienced similar treatment? I answered truthfully. Regional HR had done nothing when I'd mentioned Dylan's comments early on, suggesting I was being too sensitive. 2 other female employees had quietly mentioned similar experiences, but were too scared to complain. Dylan's behavior was an open secret that everyone tolerated because he hit his sales targets. Jennifer's expression got darker with each answer. This wasn't just about Dylan anymore. This was about a systemic failure that exposed the company to massive liability. The meeting lasted 4 hours. By the end, they'd agreed to conduct a full investigation. They assured me I'd face no retaliation. They offered to transfer me to a different region if I wanted. Patricia said, "That's not enough. We need guarantees, in writing." They stepped out to confer. Came back 30 minutes later with a proposal. I'd be placed on paid administrative leave during the investigation. I'd receive a promotion and a raise once I returned. They'd cover my legal fees, and they'd ensure Dylan was terminated if the investigation confirmed my allegations. I looked at Patricia. She looked at me. I could see the calculation in her eyes. This was a decent offer, but we had leverage for more. She said, "We'll consider it. But my client has suffered significant emotional distress, lost sleep, anxiety, the impact on her career and reputation. We'll need to discuss compensation for damages." That's when I realized we weren't just going to get Dylan fired. We were going to make sure this cost him and the company enough that they'd never let something like this happen again. The investigation took 3 weeks. 3 weeks where I stayed home on paid leave, watching Netflix and trying to process everything that had happened. Patricia called every few days with updates. They'd interviewed everyone in the regional office, pulled email records, reviewed Dylan's personnel file, and discovered 2 previous complaints from other companies that HR had somehow missed during his background check. The guy had a history, and corporate had hired him anyway. Sarah came over most nights, brought wine and takeout, and listened while I alternated between feeling vindicated and feeling guilty. Part of me still wondered if I'd overreacted, if I should have just quit and found another job instead of going nuclear. Sarah said, "Are you kidding me? He threatened to ruin your career if you didn't sleep with him. That's not overreacting. That's protecting yourself. And probably protecting the next woman he would have done this to." She was right. I knew she was right, but the guilt lingered anyway, programmed by years of being told to be nice, to not make waves, to handle things quietly. On day 16 of the investigation, Patricia called with news. They'd found evidence of similar harassment directed at 3 other female employees. One had quit 6 months ago and signed an NDA as part of her severance. The company's lawyers were now trying to figure out how much legal exposure they had. Patricia said, "This is good for us. The more widespread the pattern, the more they'll want to settle quickly and quietly. How much do you want out of this?" I said, "I don't know." "What's normal?" she said. "Normal doesn't apply here. You have recordings. You have corroboration. You have a company that failed its employees systematically. If we went to trial, a jury would crucify them. So we're not talking about normal settlement numbers. We're talking about enough to make you set for life if you're smart with it." My mouth went dry. I said, "How much is that?" She said, "I'm thinking we start negotiations at $2 million, plus your job back with a promotion, plus guaranteed protection from retaliation. Plus they cover all legal fees and therapy costs. $2 million. The number was absurd. I made $65,000 a year. $2 million was more than I'd earn in 30 years of working. I said, "Will they actually pay that?" Patricia said, "They'll try to negotiate down. But Amanda, they're facing potential lawsuits from multiple women, an EEOC investigation, public scandal if this gets out. Paying you $2 million to go away quietly is the cheap option." On day 20, corporate counsel called Patricia with a settlement offer. $1.5 million. My job back at a senior regional manager position in a different territory. 3 years of guaranteed employment with performance reviews conducted by corporate, not local management. Full legal fees covered. Confidential settlement agreement with an NDA. But there was a catch. Dylan would also sign an NDA. He'd be terminated and escorted from the building. But the company wouldn't disclose the reasons for his termination. He'd get 6 months of severance and a neutral reference. And I couldn't discuss the settlement or the harassment with anyone outside my immediate family and legal counsel. Patricia called it a standard corporate cover-up. They were protecting their reputation at the expense of warning other companies about Dylan's behavior. She said, "You need to decide what's more important. Money and moving forward. Or making sure everyone knows what he did." I thought about it for 2 days. Talked to Sarah. Talked to my parents. My dad said, "Baby girl, no amount of money is worth letting a predator walk free." My mom said, "You've already won. Take the money. Rebuild your life. Let karma handle the rest." I called Patricia and said, "I'll take the settlement, but I want one addition. He has to admit what he did, in writing. A confession that becomes part of the settlement file. He doesn't get to pretend he did nothing wrong." Patricia said, "They won't go for that. It creates liability." I said, "Then no deal. I'll take my chances with a public trial." She called back 6 hours later. Corporate had agreed. Dylan would have to provide a written acknowledgement of his conduct as a condition of his severance. It wouldn't be public, but it would exist. If he ever tried to claim wrongful termination or sue the company, they'd have his confession. I signed the settlement agreement on a Tuesday afternoon in Patricia's conference room. Watched the wire transfer confirmation come through on my phone. $1.5 million, minus Patricia's 40% contingency fee and taxes, left me with about $600,000 in my account. $600,000. More money than I'd ever imagined having. Enough to buy a house. Pay off my car. Take a year off if I wanted to. Never worry about a single unexpected expense again. I cried in Patricia's office. Not sad tears. Relief tears. The kind that come when you realize you don't have to be afraid anymore. Don't have to watch every word. Don't have to record every conversation. Don't have to live in constant survival mode. Patricia hugged me. Said, "You did it. You stood up to a powerful man and won. You should be proud." I was proud. Terrified and proud and overwhelmed all at once. The company scheduled Dylan's termination for the following Monday. They were going to call him in for a meeting, present him with the evidence, and walk him out. Patricia warned me to stay off social media that day, to expect angry messages or attempts at contact, to block his number and any mutual friends who might be sympathetic to him. I spent that Monday at home, phone on silent, trying not to obsess over what was happening downtown. Imagining his face when they told him it was over, when he realized I'd been 10 steps ahead the whole time, that his power play had backfired spectacularly. Around 3 p.m., I got a text from a coworker. Just one line, "He's gone." I sat on my couch and felt something release in my chest, a tension I'd been carrying for 8 months, maybe longer, since the day he first made me feel small, since the first time he touched me without permission, since the first moment I realized the man I'd dated wasn't who I thought he was. He was gone, and I was free. But freedom came with complications, the kind I didn't expect. Sarah called me 2 days after Dylan's termination. Said, "Have you seen the messages?" I said, "What messages?" She said, "People are talking, speculating. Word got out that Dylan was fired and you were involved, and some people are saying you slept your way into a settlement." My stomach dropped. I said, "Who's saying that?" She said, "Marcus posted something vague on LinkedIn about false accusations ruining careers. A few other people from the office liked it. And Dylan's updating his profile saying he's pursuing new opportunities after an amicable departure. Amicable departure. Like he'd chosen to leave. Like he hadn't been escorted out by security after multiple women reported his harassment. The NDA meant I couldn't correct the record. Couldn't explain what really happened. Couldn't defend myself against rumors and implications. I had to sit there and let people think whatever they wanted while Dylan rewrote the narrative. That first week was brutal. I'd check my phone and see messages from former colleagues asking if I was okay. Some genuinely concerned. Others clearly fishing for gossip. I stopped responding, stopped checking LinkedIn, stopped pretending I cared what people thought. Sarah said I should move. Start fresh somewhere the rumors couldn't follow. But I was stubborn. I'd lived in Phoenix for 6 years. I had an apartment I loved, friends I trusted, a whole life built here. I wasn't going to run because Dylan's enablers wanted to protect his reputation. The company offered me 3 different positions in other regions. Seattle, Atlanta, Denver. All good opportunities with better pay and clear paths to senior management. But taking one felt like admitting I needed to hide. I told Patricia I was thinking about turning them all down, just taking my settlement money and walking away from sales entirely. She said, "That's your choice. But remember why you fought. You fought for the right to keep your career. Don't let him take that from you now." She had a point. But every time I thought about going back to an office, reporting to another manager, having to prove myself all over again while whispers followed me, my chest got tight and my hands started shaking. I was developing anxiety. Full-blown, wake up at 3 a.m., with your heart racing, can't breathe properly anxiety, the kind where you can't get on a crowded elevator or sit in a meeting without feeling trapped. My doctor prescribed medication, suggested therapy. I found a therapist named Dr. Rachel Levine who specialized in workplace trauma. Sat in her office twice a week and talked about power dynamics, about how harassment doesn't end when the harasser leaves, about the invisible scars that outlast the visible ones. She said, "You won the legal battle. Now you have to win the internal one. Learning to trust yourself again. Learning to exist in professional spaces without fear. That takes time." I was impatient with time. I wanted to feel normal again immediately. Wanted the settlement money to magically fix everything. But trauma doesn't work that way. You can't buy your way out of nightmares or sudden panic attacks in grocery stores when you see someone who looks like your abuser. 3 months after the settlement, I was still unemployed, still trying to figure out what came next. I'd paid off my student loans, bought a new car, put a down payment on a small house in Scottsdale. Financial security felt good, but it didn't fill the void where my career used to be. Sarah said, "You could do something completely different. Go back to school. Start a business. Travel for a year. You have options now." But I didn't want different. I liked sales. I was good at it. I'd spent 10 years building expertise and relationships. Walking away felt like letting Dylan win, so I called the company back, said I'd take the Denver position. Senior regional manager. New territory. New team. Nobody who knew about Phoenix. The HR director sounded relieved. Said they'd been holding the position for me. That they wanted to make this right. That they valued my contributions and wanted me to succeed. I wondered if that was true, or if they just wanted to prove their settlement was justified. Either way, I accepted. I moved to Denver in October. Found an apartment in the Cherry Creek neighborhood, with mountain views and walking distance to coffee shops and restaurants. The city felt clean and fresh and full of possibility, like I could reinvent myself here. My first day at the new office, I walked in wearing a navy suit and heels that made me 3 inches taller. My boss was a woman named Catherine Torres, 50-something with gray hair she didn't bother to dye, and a reputation for running the tightest, most successful region in the company. She shook my hand and said, "I know why you're here. I know what happened in Phoenix. And I want you to know that shit doesn't fly in my region. You're safe here." I almost cried right there in her office. Instead, I said, "Thank you." She said, "Don't thank me. Just do good work. Show these guys what you're capable of. That's the best revenge." She was right. The best revenge was success. Was taking everything Dylan tried to destroy and rebuilding it bigger and better than before. But some nights, lying in my new apartment in a new city, I still wondered if the cost was worth it. Yes, I had money. Yes, I had a better position. But I also had anxiety medication and therapy appointments, and moments where I'd freeze up in meetings when a male colleague stood too close. I'd won the battle, but I wasn't sure I'd won the war. The first 3 months in Denver were harder than I expected. Catherine was an excellent boss, supportive and clear with expectations. The team was professional. Nobody asked about Phoenix, but I was constantly on edge, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Every time a male colleague complimented my work, I analyzed it for hidden meaning. Every time I got called into Catherine's office, my pulse spiked. I was hypersensitive to power dynamics in a way that made normal professional interactions feel threatening. Dr. Levine said it was textbook PTSD, that my brain was still in survival mode, scanning for threats that weren't there anymore. She said healing wasn't linear. Some days I'd feel strong and capable. Other days I'd feel like I was back in that conference room with Dylan, trapped and powerless. Around month 4, something shifted. I closed a major deal with a tech startup, $250,000 in annual revenue. Catherine took me out to celebrate, just the two of us at a steakhouse downtown. Over expensive wine and ribeyes, she told me her own story. How she'd faced discrimination as a Latina woman climbing the corporate ladder in the 80s. How she'd been passed over for promotions, sexually harassed, told to smile more and talk less. She said, "You think you're the first woman to get chewed up by this industry. You're not. But you're one of the few who fought back and won. Don't waste that. Don't let what he did define the rest of your career. I said, how do you stop feeling afraid? She said, you don't stop feeling it. You just stop letting it control you. Fear is information. Listen to it, but don't obey it. That conversation changed something. I started taking more risks, volunteering for high-profile clients, speaking up in meetings, pushing back when someone dismissed my ideas. Each small act of courage made the next one easier. By month 6, I'd become one of the top performers in the region. My sales numbers were strong. My team respected me. I was building something real. But the shadow of Phoenix wouldn't completely fade. In February, almost a year after the settlement, I got a LinkedIn message from Marcus, the same Marcus who'd posted about false accusations. He said he was sorry, that he'd been wrong about me, that he'd found out the full story from another coworker and wanted to apologize. I stared at that message for an hour before responding. Part of me wanted to tell him to go to hell, that his apology was a year too late and worth exactly nothing. But another part of me wanted to close that chapter with something other than bitterness. I wrote back, I appreciate you reaching out. What happened in Phoenix taught me a lot about who people really are when things get hard. I hope you learned something too. He responded immediately, said he had learned, that watching how the company handled everything opened his eyes to problems he'd been blind to, that he'd become more aware of dynamics he used to dismiss. It wasn't enough, but it was something. In March, Sarah told me Dylan had been fired from his new job. Apparently, another woman had complained about inappropriate behavior. This time, he didn't have the benefit of a corporate cover-up. The company put out a statement about terminating an employee for policy violations. Industry gossip filled in the rest. Sarah said, "Karma's real." I said, "Karma's too slow. But I'll take it." Hearing about his second termination should have felt satisfying. Instead, I felt sad. Sad that he'd had another chance and blown it. Sad that another woman had to go through what I went through. Sad that the NDA I'd signed had let him slide into another position where he could do more damage. I called Patricia and asked if there was any way to void the NDA, to warn other companies about him. She said legally, no, you signed an agreement. But Amanda, he's establishing a pattern. Eventually, someone will file charges that stick. Your documentation helped your case. The next woman's documentation will help hers. The pattern becomes undeniable. It wasn't enough, but it was all I could do. By summer, I'd stopped thinking about Dylan most days. Stopped checking his LinkedIn profile. Stopped wondering what he was telling people about me. I was too busy living my actual life to worry about his version of events. I got promoted again in August. Director of Sales for the Mountain West region. 4 states, 37 direct reports. A salary that made my parents cry with pride when I told them. I bought a bigger house in Littleton with a home office and a yard for the dog I'd adopted. The dog was a German Shepherd mix named Justice. Sarah thought the name was too on the nose. I thought it was perfect. Catherine retired that fall. At her going-away party, she pulled me aside and said, "You know what I'm proudest of. Not my sales records or my tenure. I'm proudest that I helped create an environment where women like you could recover and thrive. That's a legacy worth more than any bonus." I hugged her and thanked her for believing in me, for giving me space to heal and opportunities to prove myself, for being the kind of boss Dylan could never be. At the end of that year, almost 2 years after the settlement, I did something I'd been putting off. I wrote a letter to the women who'd complained about Dylan before me, the ones who'd signed NDAs, the ones whose experiences had corroborated my case. I couldn't break my NDA by discussing specifics, but I could thank them for their courage, for their willingness to come forward, even though it hadn't led to justice at the time, for making it possible for my case to be taken seriously. I mailed the letters with no return address. I never heard back, but it felt important to acknowledge that I hadn't won alone, that my victory was built on the backs of women who'd tried and failed before me. In therapy, Dr. Levine said I was processing survivor's guilt, struggling with the fact that I'd gotten justice when others hadn't. She said it was normal, healthy even, a sign that I understood the larger context of my experience. She asked if I was ready to stop therapy, if I felt like I'd done the work. I said, I think I'll always be doing the work, but maybe I don't need to do it here every week anymore. We agreed to space out our sessions, once a month instead of twice a week, check-ins instead of intensive processing. The day I walked out of her office after our last regular session, I felt different, lighter, like I'd set down a weight I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. Today, I'm 33 years old, 3 years removed from the worst professional experience of my life. I make $180,000 a year. I own a house. I have a career I'm proud of. I have a dog who greets me at the door every night like I'm the best thing that ever happened to him. Some days I still get anxious. Still have moments where someone's tone or body language triggers a memory, but those moments are fewer now. Farther apart, less intense. I've built a life that Dylan can't touch, can't diminish, can't take away. Last month I spoke at a women in business conference in Phoenix, my first time back to the city since I left. Standing on that stage, looking at 200 women in the audience, I told a version of my story. The parts I could legally share, the lessons I learned, the importance of documentation, the power of refusing to be silent. After the talk, a young woman approached me. She was maybe 25, nervous, clutching a notebook. She said, "I'm dealing with something similar. I don't know what to do. I'm scared of losing my job." I gave her Patricia's card, told her to document everything, to trust her instincts, to remember that no job is worth sacrificing your dignity and safety. She said, "Were you scared?" I said, terrified. But I was more scared of what would happen if I did nothing, and it turned out fighting back was the only choice I could live with. She thanked me and walked away. I watched her go and felt something settle in my chest. Purpose, maybe, or peace. The understanding that my experience, as painful as it was, had given me something valuable. The ability to help others facing the same battles. I think about Dylan sometimes. Wonder if he's changed. If he's in therapy. If he understands what he did and why it was wrong. I hope so. Not for his sake, but for the sake of any women in his orbit. But mostly, I don't think about him at all. He took up enough space in my head for long enough. He doesn't get to live there anymore. Instead, I think about Catherine's advice. About fear being information, but not instruction. About courage being action in spite of fear, not the absence of it. I think about the women who came before me, the ones who complained and weren't believed, who signed NDAs and disappeared, who sacrificed their careers to try to stop men like Dylan. I think about the women who'll come after, who'll face their own Dylans, who'll have to decide whether to fight or flee. I hope my story, in whatever form they hear it, gives them courage, gives them permission to believe they deserve better, deserve justice, deserve to work without fear, because that's what this was really about. Not money, not revenge, not even justice in the legal sense. It was about dignity, about refusing to be treated as less than, about looking at a system designed to protect powerful men and saying no, not this time, not with me. And if I had to do it all over again, knowing how hard it would be, knowing the anxiety and the rumors and the sleepless nights, I would, in a heartbeat. Because the alternative, accepting abuse to keep a paycheck, would have destroyed something essential in me, something that money can't buy back and therapy can't repair. I won because I refused to lose, because I prepared, because I had help from people who believed me, because I got lucky with timing and evidence and a company that was more afraid of publicity than loyal to one mediocre manager. Not every woman gets that lucky. Not every fight ends with a settlement and a promotion. Sometimes you fight and still lose. Sometimes the system protects the abuser anyway. But you still have to fight. Because the alternative is teaching powerful men that they can do whatever they want without consequences. And that's a world I refuse to accept. So here I am, 3 years out. Successful. Stable. Mostly healed. Living proof that you can face down your nightmare and come out the other side intact. Dylan thought he had all the power. Thought his title and connections and willingness to threaten meant he could control me. He was wrong. The power was always mine. I just had to be brave enough to use it. And if you're reading this, dealing with your own Dylan, wondering if it's worth it to fight back, let me tell you, it is. It's terrifying and exhausting, and there will be moments you want to quit. But on the other side of that fear is a life where you don't have to be afraid anymore, where you stand up straight and speak up loud and know that nobody can take your dignity unless you let them. I didn't let them, and neither should you. That's my story. That's my truth. That's the life I built from the wreckage of the worst thing that ever happened to me. And honestly, I wouldn't trade it for anything.